Hello and welcome to another edition of For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest today, Lisa Tepper Bates. She is a returning guest to the show, although it's been a while. She's Executive Director for Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness, and we welcome her back to the show. So welcome back.
Thank you, Sean, for having me.
We're going to talk about homelessness, unfortunately, in the state of Connecticut, but not unfortunate in the sense that we're bringing attention to it and hopefully we're moving in the right direction to try to end it. But let's start out with the state of homelessness in general in Connecticut. Where are we? And maybe where are we compared to the last time you were on? Is it getting better?
Sean, it's actually a really good news story, and I can tell you that it is actually getting better. And what I would say is this, that our best indicator every year of how we're doing is when we do something called the point-in-time count. This is actually a national exercise. It's a sort of census of homelessness done once a year. And we go out with an army of volunteers and nonprofit providers, and we literally count everybody who's homeless. This past year, we completed the point-in-time count in February, and we had our lowest count ever since we started doing it in 2006.
Wow.
So that's tremendous. And notably, we have some really serious victories. Since the last time, every other year, we canvass the whole state for people not only in shelter but unsheltered every other year. So we had a drop of 30% in the number of people unsheltered and homeless since the last time we did that count. And just since last year, we had a decrease of 20% of the highest need portion of the homeless, the folks we refer to as chronically homeless. So they've been homeless either a very long time or many times and are living with severe disabling conditions. And a decrease in 20% of that population of the homeless from one year to the next is really telling us that we're headed the right direction.
First of all, what a daunting task it is to have the census takers be everywhere, to be able to get a somewhat reliable number to do that. How do you do that?
Yeah, it's quite a process, and it's really incredible the way people turn out in their communities to help us. But first of all, every shelter in the state on the same night is counting and taking basic information on who's there so that we do get demographic information about who's homeless as well as the numbers. But then the count outside is really something. You know, we've got people who are up until late hours in the night who are going to different places where we know there are encampments or where homeless people who are not in shelters might congregate, and they are having discussions with them to get their information. It's a big effort, and it happens every year. As a rule in January, this year, as you probably recall, our weather was so bad that we had to delay to February.
As soon as you started talking about outside, it made me think about this absolutely brutal winter we had this year. That was awful.
It was beyond belief, and our shelters were really stretched to the limit, and we were very grateful to the state of Connecticut because they did make available some extra resources. Because remember, all of our homeless shelters are nonprofits. These are not state-run or even local government-run entities. They are, as a rule, nonprofits. So the extra funding from the state really helped a lot.
And that's in lieu of everything that you hear with budgets being cut everywhere. But you were able to make a difference in the positive direction.
Well, that's right, and some of it's about resources, and some of it's about how well you work with what you have. So a lot of the improvement that we're seeing is also the result of some really tough efforts and some really good work to bring together more effectively what we have. And if you'll allow me, I'll tell you what I mean by that. It has been the case for a long time in all of our communities that there were shelters and housing programs, different resources for people facing homelessness. And if you were homeless, you'd have to kind of go knock on every door and see what you could get. Everybody had their own wait list. Now, one person might have had their name on 5 wait lists and have lots of people trying to help them. Someone else, maybe somebody who's even more in need, might not have actually sought help from anybody, but was living homeless outdoors. That's not a good system.
Yeah.
So what we've been working hard to do across the state is bring together our providers in each community as a team so that if you present needing shelter, you don't have to ask everybody who has a shelter. You come in one door and we work together to figure out where we can put you.
Efficiency.
That's right, and that's what you've got to do in nonprofits generally, I think, but especially in homelessness. We realized that this was going to be the way to do better with what we have, and it's making a substantial difference already.
And, you know, if one shelter has to turn you away only because of the lack of capacity, they have to, you can immediately, you know, go somewhere else, the next closest that's available, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
And even better, another part of our system is not just how to get you into shelter, but how to work most effectively with the housing resources we have to get people housed. And one thing we know is that there is a small percentage of the homeless who, again, have been homeless a long time and have disabling conditions. There are folks that I'm sure you have seen here and there who have severe mental illness and are living outside.
Right.
And those are people that we want to take care of because it's the right thing to do. But they're also people who, when they are experiencing homelessness, are costing a lot to our public systems.
Right.
They're arrested by the police, they go to court, they're in prison for a little while, then they come out because they didn't really do much of anything wrong.
Right.
Then they're at the hospital.
And it's a
Then they're on
cycle.
the street and they're cycling in and out. And we know by housing those folks and providing a little bit of support to them so that they can stay stable, we save public dollars that we can ill afford to waste.
For those people, is there the ability to go a little bit beyond simply housing them shelter-wise, but any kind of ability for them to be able to get medical treatment?
There is, and I'm glad you raised that. And you know, this is an interesting area because it's the legacy of some poor public policy decisions made a long time ago.
Absolutely.
And that was the closure of our mental institutions.
Yeah.
Of which we had several in the state.
I don't think they wanted to accept the fact that they would simply be going to the street, become homeless, right?
Well, I think, Sean, and I've talked to some very good people who were very junior in their careers when we were closing Norwich State Hospital, other state hospitals, and they would tell you that there was a lot of thinking about how to provide mental health services in our communities instead of just in hospitals, so that was good. But when I asked them, what about where to house folks? They just didn't think about it. And I think that's because if we could go back 30 years, people thought, you know, somebody discharged from the hospital or otherwise mentally ill would just live with their family forever. And it turns out it's not that easy, and it doesn't always work. Often it doesn't work. So what we're really trying to do in the world of homeless services is address a problem created 30 years ago when we failed to think about how would we help that part of our population who are going to face mental illness in a way that can be severe and disabling. With that in mind, what we've found over time is that with a housing subsidy to help them stay housed, and with case management and that treatment opportunity that you refer to, that people who, even those who face a severe mental illness, can stay housed at a rate of over 90%.
Wow.
That's pretty good.
When you say stay housed,
Yeah.
how long of a period of time are we talking?
Permanently.
Permanently, okay.
Yeah, we're
All right.
talking about people who are housed in your community here. And you wouldn't know it. Many of them, they're just going about their life the way the rest of us do.
We might have mentioned this the last time we were on the show, but I think people sometimes think of homelessness in large metropolitan areas and larger cities, and that's not the homelessness. You know, happens in small towns and rural areas, and it doesn't matter what your geographically where you are, your financial situation. It's all encompassing, isn't it?
It is, and it's really important that you point that out. Of course, our biggest concentrations of homelessness are in the big cities, but there is homelessness everywhere. I just today was in a small rural town which is struggling with this issue of homelessness. And then there's often a temptation to say, well, the people in our town who are homeless are coming from somewhere else. They're not from here. And I have to tell you, I've heard that everywhere in the state. And when we look at where they actually come from,
Yeah.
almost always, this is a local issue because there is poverty, there is mental illness, there's tough times. And in a high housing cost state, you put all that together and you will have homelessness.
And, it all goes along with the stigma of homelessness where people, kind of don't want to admit it or don't necessarily want to do anything about it or maybe not know what to do. It's real easy to see someone sitting on a park bench or laying down on the park bench and just kind of going about your business and not, taking, I don't know, I think they wouldn't know what to do. It's someone else is going to have to figure this out, because as I'm driving by in my car, I don't know what to do. I see that person on the bench, but what do I do? Do I call the police? Do I allow him some time to himself? I think people think that.
Right. Well, and what we've got now in the state, which is a real improvement over the previous lack of a system, is the access to all forms of shelter services through 211, which is our state helpline run by the United Way. We've got a wonderful partnership with the United Way. So even people who drive by somebody could call 211 and say, hey, I've seen somebody who's homeless. Could you get in touch with the right people in that area, right? Now, obviously, if anyone sees somebody who is homeless but looks like they're unconscious,
right,
and that's an emergency
right,
call.
you'll call 911, but if you just see someone sitting there, maybe with their backpack or something like that, you may think there's a chance that they could be homeless, but nobody usually, they'll think it in their mind, but they probably won't take it to the next level after that.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And we do have outreach teams who can go and talk with people. And especially with veterans, that's another really bright spot.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I do want to touch on that specifically. We can really get into the demographics of homelessness, but one area I do want to touch on, which I think is concerning for a lot of people, is veteran homelessness. Can you talk about that?
I'd be glad to, because again, what's great is when it's an area of success.
Right.
And this is a particular area where Connecticut is actually leading the way in the nation. And here's what I mean by that. We just in August were able to announce, in tandem with the federal government, that Connecticut is the first state in the nation to end what we call the chronic homelessness of veterans. So that is those veterans who had been homeless several times or for a long time and have a severe disabling condition. And for some of those, that might be a severe mental illness triggered by PTSD,
Right.
which was part of their reaction to a terrible combat situation. We have now either housed or have on the path to housing in the next couple of weeks all veterans in the state who were in that category.
That's fantastic.
And the first state in the nation to do it.
And hopefully not the last either.
That's right.
Would people think that veterans would have avenues of opportunity, even if they are in that situation, that they would be able to get help, whether it's a Veterans Administration or the hospitals or anything like that, maybe even more so than just your what you would consider your typical homeless person?
Well, you're exactly right. And you may remember that going back just a few years, there was a national outcry because there weren't adequate resources. And after our military initiatives in Afghanistan and Iraq, we had sometimes young men and sometimes older men and women coming back from combat and unable to find their footing and ending up homeless. And the question was, what are we doing about this?
VA took a hit for a little while.
They did, and they needed to.
Yeah.
And then what they did was they stepped up. And now we have the resources we need here and across the nation to end veteran homelessness entirely.
Yeah.
And our next goal in Connecticut is to end veteran homelessness here by December.
Wow.
And we are on track to do it.
That's excellent. Just in time for the winter. I think that would be excellent. Good time to take a break. Lisa Tepper Bates is the Executive Director for the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. I'll have you give the website out for people to go and learn more.
Great. Please go to cceh.org to learn more about the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness and efforts to combat this problem in Connecticut.
All right, we'll take a short break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay right there. Welcome back to For the Record. I'm Sean Murphy. My guest, Lisa Tepper Bates. She's the Executive Director of the Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. Before we went to the break, I had you go to the website. What's on the website for people to see?
We have information about the data around homelessness in Connecticut. We've got all the latest news on what's going on across the state. There's a lot of exciting work to read about there. We've got information about where shelters are located. If people want to go and say, wow, I'd like to volunteer. Where's my local shelter? You can find that on our website.
You probably have links to social media. You're on social media too? So
Absolutely.
there's links there. You mentioned volunteers. I would assume that you're always looking for volunteers, or you can never have too many, right?
You know, that's the honest truth, because a lot of our emergency shelters really depend on volunteers who can be there to help with the guests who come in, to serve meals, and help be a resource. So there's lots of opportunity to help in your own community there.
Any special need or skills that they need to have to be a volunteer?
You know, every shelter is a little bit different, but I would say there's a way for anyone to have their skill set come to play in an effective way. If you're good with computers, often they could use somebody to help with data management, because we are more and more looking at the numbers to help us understand how to work best. If you just like talking with people, a lot of folks experiencing homelessness are very lonely, and need somebody to listen and talk with. And maybe you like to cook. Often our shelters provide meals, maybe one meal a day and maybe more, and would love to have somebody who can come and help with that too.
There's a stereotype of the typical homeless person that people think of, the lone individual, maybe an older man, you know, disheveled, got, like I said, his backpack with him, sitting on a park bench or something. The reality is they exist, but also it would be more disconcerting for someone to see, for example, a family of homeless people, and including children. Very disconcerting, very jarring to you when you see that, but it exists, doesn't it?
It does, and I'm glad you asked about that, because on the order of about 1,300 families a year will come into homelessness in Connecticut, and that includes about 2,500 children. Most of those children, Sean, are under the age of 5. Very typical scenario is a young single mother with 2 small children. And what's unfortunate about that, there's a lot, of course, but one of the worst parts is the fact that we know that the best predictor that an adult will end up seeking emergency shelter is if that adult was in an emergency shelter as a child. So when we can help those children avoid the experience of homelessness and needing shelter, and we've done something good for the rest of their life and the trajectory that they're on. And there are ways that we can work with families to help them stay out of the condition of homelessness. Here in New London County, the providers of services to the families are doing great work in that regard. Right now, they are helping 8 out of every 10 families who present looking for emergency shelter to resolve their housing crisis in some other way to allow them not to need emergency shelter. And that is some great work. Sometimes it means helping them negotiate with a landlord. They might have lost a job and have not been able to pay rent and think they have no choice but to leave. Sometimes you can still save that working with the landlord. Sometimes it's a matter of needing to live a little longer with family while they get on their feet. Sometimes you can negotiate that back. So sometimes even when they think the only option is emergency shelter, there is another way. And there is some information about that at our website. We actually have a project at CCEH called the Be Homeful Project. And through that, we are offering the opportunity to our friends and neighbors in Connecticut to donate if they are so inspired, so that we can work with more families with small children to help them avoid homelessness.
How does it adversely affect children more so, or in any way compared to adults? I mean, they have to. I mean, are they still able to go to school, or are they affected education-wise too? It's got to be much worse even for the children.
You know, you're exactly right, and we know more and more about exactly how much worse it is than other childhood traumas from science. And what we see is that children, as you can imagine, they're just more sensitive than adults. Their brains are still forming. They respond differently to trauma and stress than adults, and often worse. And what we are more and more seeing borne out by medicine and science is that that kind of severe trauma of homelessness can be very damaging and can have long-term impacts. It impacts their ability to learn and to thrive. It can impact their physical health. We see higher rates of asthma among children who have experienced homelessness. We see higher rates of stomach problems. So we know that it's not in any one area, but in multiple areas, that it can be a negative and possibly lasting negative experience for children.
You know, this is an impossible question for you to answer because there are so many different variables, but I'll ask anyway. Uh, you know, what's causing the homelessness in the first place? Obviously, economic issues, health issues that we already talked about, but are you seeing anything that's more predominant than others as far as causes?
Well, I think in Connecticut, we have to bear in mind that we are a very expensive state in terms of housing costs, in terms of utility costs, and that's a big piece of it. The United Ways of Connecticut did a study not long ago called the ALICE Project. ALICE stands for Asset Limited Income Constrained but Employed. And the point of ALICE was to set some benchmarks for what do you really need to earn in a state like Connecticut to make ends meet. The federal poverty line, as you may know, stopped being meaningful years ago and has never been adjusted to really mean anything. It's sort of arbitrary. So the ALICE Project aims to understand what a family or a single person needs to make. And in Connecticut, if you put all the costs in there, a family of 4, they found, needs to make on average $65,000 as a household income just to make ends meet for 4 people.
Wow.
There are a lot of folks in this state who are not making that much of an income. Now, that doesn't mean they're all homeless, because they're not. People are creative, they are determined, they stay housed, they find a way. But what that means is that if you are making only $35,000 as a household and you hit a bump in the road, or you lose hours at work, or God forbid you lose the job, it's a very short path from there, because you haven't built a savings, because you haven't had the ability to do so, meeting the high costs of living.
Even regular people who aren't homeless are living paycheck to paycheck, and you imagine someone in this situation. It almost reminds me of a buzzword that was used after we sort of came out of the recession. People started getting their jobs back, but the term underemployed. They weren't unemployed, but they were underemployed, just kind of getting back into the job market.
Well,
and that's for
right.
regular people, you know?
That's right. And
Yeah.
a lot of people in our most fragile, lowest income segment of our state community are not able to find full-time work. So not only may they be underemployed given their skills and what they could do, but the best they can do might be a 25-hour-a-week job.
Yeah.
And if that's what's on the market, then it's hard to say, well, go find something 40 hours a week.
Yeah, easier to say than do, right?
Right.
Now, people watching today, whether it's their situation themselves or maybe know somebody, as we tape this, we're in the fall. Winter has not arrived yet. What can you do to kind of beat, not beat the heat, but beat your way into avoiding a situation like we had this last winter?
Mm-hmm.
What can they do? Obviously, call 211, but just to learn more information. The website, obviously, but what else?
Sure. Go to our website, and then I'd say also, homelessness is different in every community, and the resources that are there to help are different. What I really encourage people to do is learn about your community, whether you live in Hartford or New Haven or New London. Find out what are the resources, and maybe even call up your local shelter and ask that question. With winter coming, what do you need? And I'll be honest with you, donations always help the most.
Yeah.
Because we are all running on a shoestring all the time. And our shelters in the state tend to be 100% full year-round, let alone in the winter when they go above capacity. But I would be so pleased if some of your fans out there would call up their local shelter and say, hey, I want to support you. What can I do?
Let's take one more break and come right back. I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Stay with us. So we are just about out of time. A simple question, but not a simple answer. How do you end homelessness? It's not simply putting people into shelters, is it?
That's right, Sean. And shelters are like emergency rooms. We need them, but it's not the answer, right? The answer to ending homelessness is to help people to get housed. And that's what providers across the state of Connecticut are doing more and more, is figuring out the right housing solution for every person and every household, every family, to get them to permanent housing.
So call 211, right? And the website one more time?
That's right, cceh.org.
Lisa Tepper Bates, the Executive Director for Connecticut Coalition to End Homelessness. Thank you for being on the show. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
You can see this show and many others on our YouTube site. Till next time, I'm Sean Murphy. This is For the Record. Take care.